Hello, ChatGPT. Can you hear me?
Of course.
Okay. I have a topic on discussing examining how literature reflects and affects societal values. So let's start. What do we mean when we say literature reflect society?
Absolutely. So when we say literature reflects society, we mean that it acts like a mirror. It captures the beliefs, values, struggles, and everyday life of a particular time or place. It shows us what people cared about, what they feared, and how they dreamed. At the same time, literature can also affect society by shaping opinions, sparking debates, or inspiring movements. So it's this dynamic interplay. Literature both reflects and shapes the world around it. Let me know if you'd like me to expand on any of these points.
Okay, great answer, ChatGPT. So next question: how does literature act as a mirror of its time?
Got it. Absolutely. Let's expand each idea. So, when we say literature reflects society, we're really talking about a deep symbiosis. Literature emerges from the social, political, and economic conditions of its time. For example, consider post colonial literature. It's a powerful lens that reflects the struggles of nations after colonization, revealing both personal trauma and collective identity. On a more everyday level, literature like a novel or a poem can capture the mood of a generation, whether it's the idealism of the 1960s or the anxieties of the digital age. But not only does it reflect, it shapes. When authors explore new ideas or challenge norms, they can push society toward change. For instance, feminist literature in the 20th century didn't just reflect women's oppression, it galvanized movements, inspired activism, and changed laws. So, in sum, literature is this living dialogue with society. It records, critiques, and sometimes even prefigures the changes that will come. Let me know if you'd like further elaboration.
Okay, ChatGPT. Okay, ChatGPT, great answer. So my next question is: in what ways do novels show social class difference?
Absolutely. So when we look at novels, they become these rich, immersive spaces where social justice issues unfold. For example, a novel like Charles Dickens's Oliver Twist not only tells a compelling story about a boy, but it exposes the brutal conditions of the poor in 19th century London. Through the eyes of Oliver, we feel the injustice of child labor and the stark class divides. Similarly, Toni Morrison's Beloved delves into the haunting legacy of slavery in America. Morrison doesn't just depict individual trauma, she shows how slavery fractured families, erased identities, and created deep social scars. Another example is John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath, which illuminates the plight of migrant workers during the Great Depression. Through the Joad family's journey, Steinbeck lays bare the economic injustices, the exploitation of labor, and the systemic inequality of the time. What's crucial is that these novels don't just observe, they invite readers to empathize, to question, and even to take action. In this way, novels become a catalyst. They don't just portray the social injustices, but keep them alive in public consciousness, ensuring that the struggles and aspirations of marginalized groups are seen, heard, and remembered. Let me know if you want even more examples or angles.
Okay, great answer. So my next question is: can literature challenges traditional social norms?
Absolutely. So, when we say that literature influences social justice, we're talking about a process where stories and ideas don't just remain on the page, they enter the world and reshape it. Literature has this unique power because it moves people emotionally, but also intellectually. When a novel or poem brings a social injustice to life, it humanizes abstract statistics. Take, for instance, Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin. And published in the 19th century, it didn't just depict slavery, it became a catalyst for the abolitionist movement. Similarly, in the modern era, novels like Khaled Hosseini's The Kite Runner offer a deeply personal glimpse into the consequences of war or displacement. By giving us characters with whom we form a bond, Hosseini invites us to see refugees not as faceless victims, but as complex, resilient human beings. Another powerful example is Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, which doesn't just predict a dystopian future, it forces.
Okay, great answer. So my next question is, how do stories highlight issues like poverty and inequality?
Of course. So when we say that storytelling highlights issues like inequality, we mean that stories bring abstract concepts into personal focus. Inequality, whether economic, racial, or gender based, can feel distant or abstract. But when a story follows a character's life, we feel that inequality in a visceral way. For instance, consider a novel like Richard Wright's Native Son. Through Bigger Thomas's eyes, we witness the crushing weight of systemic racism, his poverty, his lack of opportunity, and the spiral of fear and injustice. By making us live inside his world, the story forces us to confront the deeply embedded inequalities of the era. Similarly, Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice doesn't just tell a love story, it reveals the rigid class structures of 19th century England, showing how social mobility was often stifled by birth and gender. In more recent works like Ta-Nehisi Coates' The Water Dancer, we see how storytelling can bring to life the intersection of race and power, showing how every act of survival is shaped by a system of inequality. These stories don't lecture, they immerse us, they challenge us, and they leave us changed. By showing inequality through personal struggle, storytelling inspires empathy, making us realize that behind every statistic, there's a human story. And once we feel that story, we can no longer look away. We're called to question, to act, and to push for a more equal world. Let me know if you need even more elaboration or further examples.
Okay, okay, great. And you please on the next question. Why do readers often write about injustice?
Absolutely. So, when we look at how stories help us understand justice, we have to consider the way they give complexity to moral questions. Justice isn't just a set of abstract laws, it's a lived experience shaped by individual choices and circumstances. For example, in Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, the trial of Tom Robinson isn't just a legal event, it's a window into racial injustice in the Deep South.
Okay, great answer. So my next question is, how does literature preserve cultural values?
Of course. When we think about how literature preserves cultural memory, we're really talking about its power to keep alive the stories, values, and traditions of a particular community or era. Unlike fleeting events or even spoken word, literature captures a culture's essence, its rituals, its hopes, and its struggles so that future generations can return to it. Think of Homer's Iliad or Odyssey. These epics aren't just ancient stories, they carry the spirit of Greek culture, its values of heroism, its concept of fate, and its view of human struggle. Similarly, Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart preserves the Igbo culture of Nigeria before and during colonial disruption. Achebe doesn't just tell a personal story, he preserves a worldview that was nearly lost, showing us the richness of a pre colonial society and how it was fractured. In the same way, Toni Morrison's Beloved carries forward the memory of slavery. It doesn't just recount past horrors, it ensures that the emotional truth of that history stays alive, passed down like a living memory. In this way, literature doesn't just preserve the past, it gives a culture a voice across time, allowing us to see who we were, who we are, and who we might become. By returning to these stories, we keep alive a collective memory that shapes our identity, anchors us in a shared past, and guides us as we build a future. Let me know if you'd like to go even deeper.
Okay, great answer. So my next question is, can literature bring social change and how?
Of course. When we say that literature brings about social change, we're talking about its ability to plant seeds of revolution, seeds that begin in the imagination but take root in action. Literature allows people to see the world differently. It provides them with new frames of reference, a new language for their experiences, and a vision of what could be. Take, for example, Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, published in 1906. It wasn't just a novel, it exposed the horrors of the meatpacking industry in Chicago, and that outcry helped spur the progressive era reforms, including the Pure Food and Drug Act. Or think of George Orwell's 1984. It didn't just describe a dystopia, it gave a name to mass surveillance, and it made readers aware of how power could be abused. These books and many others don't just describe injustice, they invite readers to imagine alternatives, to question accepted norms, and to believe the change is possible. In fact, novels like Arundhati Roy's The God of Small Things bring to light the subtle, everyday injustices of caste and gender in India, And by doing so, they open the door for new conversations. Likewise, the rise of young adult literature, like Angie Thomas's The Hate You Give, shows how fiction can spark movements like Black Lives Matter by giving voice to the realities of police violence. In short, literature is a rehearsal for justice. It allows us to envision the world as it is, but also as it could be. By opening up our imaginations, it gives us the courage to dream bigger, to act bolder, and to create a more just society. Let me know if you'd like me to expand further.
Okay, great answer. So, my next, how do character represent real people in society?
Absolutely. When we talk about how literature of course. When we discuss how literature represents real people, we're talking about a profound act of bringing individual humanity into the public consciousness. Writers don't just create fictional characters out of thin air, they draw on real experiences, real people, and often their own histories. By doing so, they give voice to those who may not have had one. Consider James Baldwin's essays and fiction. Baldwin drew from his own life as a black man in America, depicting characters and voices shaped by racial discrimination and exile. Similarly, in Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, she doesn't just tell a story, she brings her childhood, her trauma, and her resilience to life. These representations are powerful because they remind us that every person's story matters. What's more, literature can also correct historical silences. For example, Toni Morrison often represents the Black experience in America, which was systematically erased from mainstream narratives. By giving these real individuals a space to be seen, literature affirms their humanity, complicates stereotypes, and gives us a fuller, truer picture of the world. Even when authors create composite characters, they're often based on real people or archetypes drawn from lived experiences. Thus, literature doesn't flatten reality, it gives it depth. It helps us understand that behind every statistic, every headline, there are real people, complex, flawed, and striving for dignity. By representing them, literature not only enriches our sense of empathy, but it also anchors us in a richer, more nuanced understanding of what it means to be human. Let me know if you'd like to go even deeper.
Okay, ChatGPT, great answer. Next question: why are social concepts common themes in literature?
Absolutely. When we talk about how literature fosters empathy, we're really talking about its ability to let us live inside someone else's skin. Unlike statistics or abstract arguments, a novel or a poem places us in the middle of another person's life, giving us a first hand emotional experience. Take, for example, the way Khaled Hosseini's The Kite Runner allows us to feel the guilt and longing of Amelia as he navigates betrayal and redemption in Afghanistan. As we follow Amir's journey, we don't just observe, we feel his fear, his shame, and his yearning for forgiveness. Or consider the way Octavia Butler's Kindred thrusts us into the experience of Dana, a black woman who's transported back in time to a plantation era. By making us live through Dana's fear, alienation, and courage, Butler forces us to confront the brutal realities of slavery in a deeply personal way. What happens is that these stories break down barriers. We don't just observe injustice from a distance, we feel it in our bones. And once we feel that, we're compelled to care more deeply, to question what we've taken for granted, and to see people not as stereotypes, but as whole, complex human beings. In this way, literature creates a bridge of empathy. It's a safe space where we can walk in another's shoes, see their world through their eyes, and recognize that ultimately we share a common humanity.
Okay, ChatGPT. Okay, ChatGPT, great answer. So my next question: how do historical events influence literary words?
Of course, when we examine how movements influence literature, we're really looking at a dynamic exchange. Social movements, whether they're labor movements, civil rights, feminist, or environmental movements, don't just arise from abstract ideas, they create emotional and intellectual energy that writers respond to. The Harlem Renaissance was a cultural explosion in the 1920s and 30s, where black writers like Langston Hughes, or Neil Hurston, and Claude McKay created poetry and fiction infused with the spirit of racial pride and resistance. These writers were not just reflecting their community, they were giving voice to a movement that demanded equality and recognition. Similarly, the feminist movement in the 1960s and 70s gave rise to a wave of literature that challenged traditional gender roles. Writers like Simone de Beauvoir and later writers like Audre Lorde and Gloria Anzaldúa didn't just describe women's experiences, they challenged the structures that kept women subordinate. Likewise, environmental movements like the ones in the late 20th century gave rise to nature writing. Authors like Rachel Carson in Silent Spring didn't just raise awareness, they inspired a generation to fight for the planet. In all these ways, movements breathe life into literature. They give it urgency, passion, and a sense of shared destiny. And in turn, literature amplifies movements. It spreads their message, preserves their spirit, and gives future generations a record of what was fought for. In this way, literature and movements are intertwined. One inspires the other, and together they build a bridge from individual action to collective change. Let me know if you'd like me to explore any other aspects.
Okay, so this was our colony. I hope you like it. So, another colony with the new Pakistan.